Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Sober Motivation Podcast. Today we've got Rebecca with us. Rebecca, how are you?
I'm great, Brad. Thanks for having me. This is awesome.
Yeah, of course. After we connected and I came on your show and heard a little bit more about your story, I was like, it would be great for us to collaborate here on the podcast and for you to share your experience with everybody.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I loved having you on the podcast. I got so much good feedback from it and it was amazing. I just loved hearing all of your insights. It was fantastic. So,
Yeah. So, what was it like for you growing up?
growing up for me, I had a rough childhood. My parents were together, but there was a lot of tumultuous relationship there. And so it was a really it was really stressful and, not a good environment. I talk about that in my first book, The $1,000,000 Bakery, how, I got kicked out of my house constantly because my parents would always fight, and I would find myself in the middle of their arguments trying to defend, my mom, and my dad had a lot of anger issues, and so I grew up in that kind of tumultuous household environment. And so I ended up moving out on my own when I was 16 years old. I ended up dropping out of high school. At that time, it was just a very, very dark and stressful time for me. I was very much in survival mode, and I had to think about a lot of things, like a lot of adult things, and figure out adult situations when I was 16 years old, which to me sounds crazy now because I look at kids that are 16 years old now and I'm like, oh my God, like I was actually such a baby. At the time, I was like, I just need an environment that is, you know, kosher, that is calm, that is out of that tumultuous environment. So, yeah, so I ended up moving out. I moved out with my boyfriend at the time. And yeah, that was pretty much my childhood.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. Where did you grow up?
I actually grew up in Cambridge, Kitchener area, so I'm very familiar
Okay.
with that area. I know you live in the Kitchener area. So yeah, Cambridge is where I grew up. And so I ended up when I dropped out of high school, I tried different high schools. I couldn't I didn't really enjoy school. And so I ended up, in my early 20s, I ended up starting and growing a bakery business from the ground up to over 1,000,000 in sales, which was a really big deal for me because I felt so shitty my whole life because I you know, when people make you feel so bad for not pursuing further education or not going down the stereotypical right path, which who knows what that everybody has their own definition of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just felt really, I felt like I would never really amount to anything. And then so being able to come out of such a tumultuous childhood and, teenage years were super rough, a lot of partying, a lot of crappy situations I found myself in. And to be able to kind of pull myself out of that and start and grow a bakery business from the ground up with no education or experience was is a something that I, later down the line became really proud of. I've since closed it and moved on from that chapter of my life, but it's still something that I'm proud of considering my past.
Yeah, well, it's so interesting there too, because I was never one to excel in the classroom at all,
Yeah.
and, you're so right there, you're so right with that because I just remember vividly all of my peers were connecting over their test scores or sharing, and I was so filled with shame, right? I just grabbed the
Yeah.
test, another one that I failed, tuck it in my bag, and there it goes, like, I felt like I lost a little bit of myself every time I didn't measure up to where everybody was at, right? The class average or whatever it was. So I'm with you on that. School was never my thing. So when did you start drinking? I mean, this is high school. You mentioned partying and stuff. Like, is that when you got
Yeah, well,
involved with it, or?
since I moved out on my own at 16, it was pretty much a free for all from there. I mean, I could go to whatever party I wanted. There was a lot of, back in, I'm 37 years old now, so back then drinking alcohol was just normal thing to do even if you were underage. It was just at every party. It was very widely available. I mean, a lot of my friends' parents would buy it for us, which sounds
Mm.
crazy now, but it was super prevalent. It was a part of my regular life. Like anytime you go to your friend's house, you're drinking. It's just a part of our society. And And so I started drinking probably around 16 when I moved out on my own and I had, my own apartment and I could do whatever I want, had no real self-control at the age of 16, still kind of developing mentally. And so I was exposed to it. Also, too, at the time, I had a boyfriend who was a little bit older, so he could buy alcohol. So, it was very easy to access at such a young age. And everybody else was doing it. And honestly, that was my definition of fun at the time, which has since completely changed, obviously. But
Yeah.
that was just the fun thing to do back then. It was almost like if there was no alcohol there, then what was the point?
Yeah. Well, man, we would have been bored out of our minds, or maybe I don't know what
Mhm.
else we would have done, but I'm with you. And that's a few interesting
Mhm.
things there too, right? I think that idea of parents buying it and then having, the thought of if it's in their house, then they can kind of keep, an eye
Yeah,
on things. I don't know. My
so
kids are
hard.
not there. My kids are
Yeah.
not there yet. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's really interesting, but you're right though. Like when I'm 37 too, and I think back to when we all first started drinking. Like it was really weird if you weren't drinking. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
towards the later end of high school for me, into college, it was really weird to not be. I didn't really know, and now that I look back through this lens, like I know there's a lot of people who weren't doing it. I just wasn't hanging out with them.
Mhm.
The people I
Exactly.
kind of surrounded
So
myself
true.
with, that's what we did. But I mean, it was good fun. It was good fun for a little bit. Like I didn't really pick up on things being a problem until a little bit into it, but, having those rough nights, but it was also celebrated. My friend group, it was celebrated for how wild it was, or yeah, how little you remembered. It was for me, I always struggle with acceptance and belonging and fitting in. So this was, all hindsight 2020. This was kind of like my pathway into a crowd. Where do things go for you? Because you mentioned you started a business. So I mean, how do you flip things from, leaving school, feeling all that stuff you talked about before, to having this ambition or this desire, or even these thoughts of like, hey, I could, start a business and make something of this.
Yeah, so interesting. When I was younger, I wasn't really a people pleaser I didn't really struggle with trying to fit in necessarily. I was very assertive. I just kind of did my own thing. But so it's kind of interesting because I didn't have that issue where I was trying to necessarily fit in with people, but because everybody else was doing it, and it was my definition of fun. It was kind of like a little bit opposite of that where I wasn't really trying to fit in, but, like, it was so normalized, and like you said, with parents buying it and stuff, it was like it just seemed fine because the parents were drinking that like, the examples were drinking, and so it was just so normalized, right? So what happened was I met my husband when I was in my young 20s, and so he actually went to rehab. He struggled with drugs more so than alcohol, but he went to rehab and he got sober before we ever even met. So when we went on one of our first dates, the first thing that he told me was that he had been to rehab and he kind of spilled everything out on the table. And I was so naive. So I was like, I don't know what that means. That kind of freaks me out. I'm like, I had been in some previously pretty crappy relationships before. So I was like, I don't know if this is a good idea for me. I don't wanna go into another relationship where, like, you being sober mean that you're gonna struggle with this down the road? Like, is this something that I'm gonna have to deal with? It was like, it really freaked me out, to be honest, because even
Yeah.
though I drank my whole life, I was so naive to the fact of what sobriety meant, what going to rehab meant, how like, I had no clue. So it was my first, like, inclination or my first experience, I guess you could say, with, you know, an addiction issue, and I really liked him. He's my husband now and everything's fine, but I didn't know that everything would be fine when I first met him and
Yeah.
he told me that he went to rehab. I was like, "Oh my gosh." Um so we kinda joke about it now, but anyways, we started and grew this bakery business together, and, it was fun. I just started as a hobby. I didn't really take it seriously in the beginning. I did not know what I wanted to do my entire life. Like, I think it's crazy when we put so much pressure on kids right out of high school to try and determine what they wanna do. Like, I still don't know what I wanna do when I grow up. I don't think I ever will. I think I'll continue to change and evolve, and my career will continue to change and evolve as I do. So Anyways, we grew this business from the ground up to over 1,000,000 in sales. We had 4 store locations, a fleet of delivery vans that spiraled a 2-hour radius, and about 20 staff at the peak of it. And so we grew it together. I drank, casually. I never really thought I had a problem. I just drank my whole life. I ended up
Mm,
quitting alcohol about 3 years ago, so I drank the entire time we had the business. Not to a excess per se, but it did become a problem because it impacted my energy levels and how I felt. So I wasn't showing up as the best version of myself as often as I could have if I had quit alcohol earlier. And looking back now, I wish that I gave it up a long time ago. But yeah, alcohol was it was always prevalent in growing a business, and growing a business to that scale. It's so stressful. Like, a lot of people just like to look at the highlight reels of everything, but it's so
yeah.
stressful and it's such a huge responsibility. Like, you're responsible for everything. I mean, I know that it's a bakery and it's like, well, how serious can a cupcake shop be? But like, you're dealing with weddings, you're dealing with birthdays. These are very special, important events for other people, and they take it very seriously. So then I did. And so the pressure and the stress of it, like, I could easily go home at the end of the day and drink an entire bottle of wine. That was like, no, I would just get a buzz. I wouldn't really get hammered per se, but like, it took the edge off, and I needed something to take the edge off.
Yeah. Wow, that it's interesting too with, the story with your husband too. I'm thinking, yeah, my goodness, that would yeah, I mean, that would raise some questions like, what does all this mean, right? You're not introduced to the
I
sobriety
almost
world and
I almost did not go on a 3rd date with him, and that would have been so sad if we didn't end up together. But, like, it I was
Mm,
so naive to what going to rehab or what sobriety or having addiction issues. I had no clue. I was like, I just want to avoid that. And I, of course, even though I drank, I didn't think that I had an issue because everybody else was drinking. It was more normalized than, say, doing drugs and going to rehab and going down that path. So in my mind, I didn't think I had a problem. I thought he had a problem. So it was like I didn't really know what to do from there, and honestly, we talked about it after, and I was like, that was like he was like, "I just wanted to let you know because obviously I don't want that to come up later," which I totally agree with. It would have been worse if he told me later, right? After we're married, like, "By the way, I went to rehab in my early 20s." So, yes, I understand in hindsight that it made sense to do that, but it did really freak me out, and I think that that just goes to show the state of our mindset in our society where we're faced with something that has to do with addiction and our back goes up. We're like, "Ooh, I don't know." Like, we're not educated about it.
yeah, and that's definitely a thing. I think we're moving in the right direction, but yeah, I can see,
Mhm.
when you were in your 20s there too, it wasn't something that we were talking about every day or really knew about. I'm really interested sort of, your thoughts on this too, right? Because you mentioned running the business, the stress, the pressure of, showing up for the customers and growing this business for yourself, and then, coming home and looking for kind of maybe an escape or a way to just kinda get away from that a little bit. I mean, what was your experience too, like, looking around at maybe other people, if you were connecting with people, like, what role did alcohol play in sort of gatherings and networking and connecting with other people? Was that a thing or no?
Absolutely, yeah, and so for me, because I am very much an introvert, so for me, alcohol was my anesthetic. Like, it helped me so much in social situations. And I really if there wasn't gonna be alcohol at a networking event or something, like, I just would not go. Like, I wouldn't have the I just would not wanna go. Like, I couldn't even think of going to something without alcohol to help me calm down, to, just to be able to socialize with people that I might not necessarily, like, want to. Like, I realized afterwards that if you feel like you need to have alcohol to have a good time, you're probably in the wrong room. You're probably hanging out with the wrong people. They're probably not interesting to you or whatever. You don't have something in common with them because I would use it all the time as a crutch to socializing. So it would really help ease my anxiety. It would help me have a good time. It would make me a little bit more extroverted, which is like I learned later on, just like accept that you're an introvert and just accept yourself for how you are. But in a world where extroverts are regarded as fun and they're chosen more for job interviews, like in our society, we kind of put extroverts as the favorite and introverts are, weird creative people over here. And so I felt like I needed that in order to give me the extra boost of extrovertness or energy or whatever I felt like I was lacking. And obviously, I since realized it wasn't really a lack of anything. I was just unaligned in these situations. But there's a lot of pressure in the business world, and not just business, but I think in careers that have really high stress jobs like doctors and lawyers and things like that, where it's like you almost need something to help you with that, because I don't think as humans we're meant to carry that kind of weight. We're not meant to like have that level of stress. And so obviously there's healthy ways to deal with it, but if you're not intentional with those things, then you will find yourself going down a path naturally, especially in our society where it's totally normal and encouraged to drink if you to numb your emotions and numb all of the stress. But yeah, in the business world, super prevalent, obvious, even with celebrating things, right? It's like every time you celebrate a milestone or you're going to these award ceremonies or whatever, there's champagne, right? And it's like, it, it's just it's very over glamorized, and I did not see a problem with it for the longest time. And keep in mind, like, I was married and living with somebody who had been sober ever since I met him, and he kind of gave me that perspective. He never had an issue with me drinking or whatever, and I thought it was awesome because I always had a permanent DD, so it was great for me. But he was kind of the first example of somebody that didn't drink, and maybe if I didn't meet him or marry him, maybe I wouldn't have quit. I don't think I would have, because I just never had that. I never knew anybody that just didn't drink. I thought that that would be weird, or like who who doesn't drink, right? Because it was so normal to me. So it was kind of my first
Yeah.
example of somebody who was able to do that, and he was also able to like have fun. And it kind of in the back of my mind made me think twice about it, and eventually led to me quitting down the road. But yeah, it was my first example of somebody being able to live life without drinking or doing drugs.
Yeah, interesting, and a lot of people share that too, that there wasn't really many people, if any, around them that weren't drinking. Interesting too, you mentioned about, like, the high stress and, reaching for alcohol, and then there obviously are other healthy ways we can deal with it. What I find, kind of fascinating too, and what I relate to is, like, alcohol worked so well to
It does.
numb things out. For my story, it worked
Yeah.
until it didn't, but when it worked really well, and I find when I look back, every time I leaned on it, that just became easier and easier the next time to say yes to it, to say yes. And then what that did in my life was it didn't really push me to work on developing any other strategies to deal with the overwhelm or the stress or the disappointment or the celebrations. I just didn't have any other tools in my bag. It was just like,
Yeah.
this works well. Let's just plug into this. I can go to the store, spend $10, do a quick transaction, and then feel a little bit better. Or, like you mentioned too, right? Maybe build that confidence in the social settings of different places where, like, I would think if people actually knew how I was feeling or how terrified I was of of being inside some of these parties or gatherings or whatever it
Yeah.
was, I was like, they would be so surprised. So I felt like I had to overdo it in some ways. When did you like ever kind of pick up on or have any thought throughout this about, I don't know if problem is the right word, but maybe something is off here. Like, did you ever have a gut feeling of like maybe life would be better if I didn't drink or anything like that? Or was that kind of towards the end?
Yeah, I think having a problem is very subjective to what people interpret a problem being. Because now I look back and I'm like, clearly a problem. I'm putting toxins in my body. I'm on the weekends drinking too much, going out drinking too much so that I'm throwing up and I'm so sick and I can't function for the next 3 or 4 days. And thinking back then, my mindset, I did not think I had a problem. But now completely changed. And I look back and I'm like, yeah, that was freaking problem. So yeah, I think it is very subjective to what we perceive a problem to be. But as the business got more stressful, as I indulged more in wine, as I went to more of these networking events and trying to kind of mask my true personality with it, I would take it to greater and greater excess, which that creates more situations of feeling like crap. So, I would go to these parties or events, I would overdo it. I would come home, I'd be sick, hungover for like 5 days. And, as you get older, you don't really rebound from hangovers as well as you used to. So I would feel like crap more times than I would feel good. And to me, I was like, I don't want to live like this. I cannot live like this. It would lower my energy. I would have fatigue for extended periods of time. I just did not feel good. I didn't feel energized. And again, my husband being a comparison, he had energy out the freaking roof. And I was like, That's got to be just your personality." But like, he wasn't drinking, he wasn't putting this toxins in his body. And so the more I learned about the health implications of alcohol, that's when my mindset kind of started to shift a little bit to think about what I'm actually putting in my body. And the reason why my body responds the way that it does to alcohol is probably a clear indicator that it's really, really bad for you. So I started kind of educating myself on health and wellness. I embarked on a health and wellness journey, and I still drank while I was on it because that's what my doctor even told me: drink in moderation. It's totally fine. And so, I ended up losing 70 pounds. I,
Wow.
quit eating a lot of sugar. I ended up closing down my bakery business because it conflicted with my health and wellness journey. And I didn't want to sell sugar, processed foods. I didn't want to be part of that industry anymore. So it completely changed my life. And during that time, when I embarked on my health and wellness journey, I still drank in quote unquote moderation, as they say. But down the line, I would be watching these shows and these documentaries talking about how alcohol is considered a level 1 carcinogen, which is the same as smoking cigarettes. It's the same as asbestos, all of these things that are on the same playing field level as drinking alcohol. And it really started to shift my mindset. And I was like, whoa, I'm putting a lot of emphasis on a health and wellness journey, on my lifestyle. I'm doing all of these things, implementing wellness techniques like I do the sauna, I'll cold plunge, I'll work out, I don't eat processed foods as much. I was putting a lot of effort into my health and wellness. And I was also, drinking a glass of wine with dinner. And I was like, eventually I got to the point where I realized like why I'm putting on all this effort. And by putting alcohol in my body, it's kind of not doing that, right? So it didn't align properly for me. And so the more I learned about the health implications of it, I was like, I have to get to a place, but I just couldn't wrap my head around not having it for the rest of my life. Like, when you
Yeah.
quit something and you come to terms with, okay, I'm not going to have this again for the rest of my life. I could not wrap my head around that. I could not. So I just started cutting back. I started, slowly trying to drink less and less. But then I was like, maybe someday I'll drink it again. It was not like I'm going to quit alcohol and become sober. Like I just couldn't commit to that. But I ended up having a huge situation that really kind of, made me realize that I absolutely cannot do this anymore. And so I ended up quitting because I just felt like absolute crap. And my health and wellness was more important to me, my priority. And so I knew that if I wanted to continue prioritizing that drinking a toxic substance was not going to serve me well.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that too. I want to go back a little bit to the wellness journey, and closing down the business. When did that start, and was there something that sparked that for you?
I think it was a culmination of feeling like crap most of the time, which, alcohol was a contributor to it for sure, because I mean,
Yeah.
after work and on weekends, I was drinking. And also, I ate a lot of sugar and processed foods. Like my diet was completely crap. I mean, I'm surrounded by baked goods all day, so I'm snacking on them. Like I had no
Yeah.
awareness of that either. Everybody else was doing it. I thought it was normal as well. So yeah, my lifestyle was just really crappy, and as a result, I had no energy. I felt fatigued. I just, I was very overweight. At my heaviest, I was 270 pounds. So that carrying around that much excess weight, that's going to make you tired. That's going to make you feel like crap. And so I think I really just realized that I have to change my lifestyle. And I really took it one baby step at a time, which I think is what really helped make it sustainable. Slowly started to reduce my sugar, slowly started to add more water, just really, really minuscule things that over time compounded. Like I read the book, The Atomic Habit book, and habit stacking, and I learned how to do that with healthy habits. And so I started this health journey while we were running the bakery business, while it was, the height of my career essentially. And I just thought sugar's fine in moderation. And I didn't have a conflicting feeling about it until I started to realize how good I felt without eating all that sugar and without eating all that processed foods, and I was like, "Well, that's a wake-up call," because, um, during this time, I still drank and everything like that, but it was a big wake-up call that health and well like, when I started to feel good and think clearly and having that energy, I was like, "Well, what else do I need to do? Maybe if I adopt this habit or cut this out of my life, maybe I'll feel even better," because I just started feeling better and better and it kind of compounded over time. So I was like, there's no way I'm going back to this old lifestyle of eating like crap, drinking and all of that in excess. And so as I started to feel better, I was like, it really started pulling me out of that habit and that mindset, and I really realized how alive you can feel when you are intentional with it. And so, I was on this health journey for probably the last 2 years of running my bakery business, and I tried to rationalize it. I tried to be like, sugar is fine in moderation. And I would just try to rationalize it. But at the end of the day, I was like, it's really hard for me to go to work and sell something that I'm not 100% passionate about. I don't eat it in my own life. I do, but very, very minusculely, not like selling millions of dollars of sugary sweets to other people, right? So
Yeah.
I really realized that it was no longer aligned with that, and so that's when I decided that I had to close down my bakery business, and during that time, again, with the health and wellness, I realized I didn't know that alcohol was a level 1 carcinogen. I didn't know that it causes, like, tons of different types of cancer. It was a complete lack of education, and
Mm.
to be honest, it's all the marketing and advertising that they want to cover up with all of the real information, and I just didn't know. So once I became more educated and aware of it, I was like, "Wow, like, I wish I knew this sooner," but unfortunately, it just took me a while, and eventually, I just learned to prioritize the health and wellness aspect of my life, and there was nothing that was going to get in the way of that once I started to feel really good and feel really alive.
Yeah. Even going back to the spot there where you mentioned you just weren't feeling well, was that a mix of, like, physically and emotionally about how things were going for you?
Yeah, because those things are very tied together, right? Like
Yeah.
if you're physically really overweight, you're putting alcohol in your body, you're putting sugar in your body, you're physically feeling like crap, mentally you're not going to feel good. You can't really like they go hand in hand. And so I I didn't know that at the time obviously, but as I slowly implemented these healthy habits and started to really feel the difference of that, I was like, "Holy crap, I just started to become a new person, a new person, a new person." And I'm just completely a different person than who I was back then, and it's crazy to think of the mindset differences that I had back then because I just didn't think anything was a problem, and now I'm
Yeah.
like, "Oh my god, like, so many problems from it." But yeah, I think that physically I don't think you can mentally feel good if you physically don't feel good, and I've done a lot of research just for my own well-being on gut health and how alcohol really negatively impacts that and sugar and processed foods and how your gut is really tied to your mental health and your well-being, and our
Yeah.
bodies, they work together as a complete system, right? Mentally, physically, emotionally, all of the things. And so if one of those is out of balance, you have to check and see what it is and really pull yourself out of that.
Yeah, so true, so true. It's so interesting how when we look back, you hear it all the time, right? I wish I gave it up a little bit
Yeah.
sooner. I wish I quit a little bit sooner." And I mean, we don't know, we can't go back and change how things were, you know? And there's a part of me too that's like, maybe sometimes we kinda had to get to that spot to have some of those rough times, right? Or those times where we overdid it, or those times where it was more than we wanted to do to kinda get to the spot where we were willing to do what it was gonna take on the other side of it. So interesting though in your story, and we'll kinda get back on track maybe after this question though, but a lot of people when they quit drinking is reaching for sugar. What was that like
Mhm.
for you? Since you're
Well,
already making sort of that you're already kinda cutting back in that area.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I cut back substantially on sugar before I actually quit drinking alcohol. So, when I did that, like, that was if I'm comparing what was harder to quit, sugar or alcohol, they're both like, they were both so hard for me to give up. And, I do sugar in, like, very, very, like, limited moderation. There's no part of my daily diet that has, like, sugar as a staple of it, but alcohol is completely cut out. But I'm just saying, like, the difficult level of both of those things, they were super difficult. So, when I lost the 70 pounds, I ended up on a keto diet, so there was no sugar involved in that. You could still drink very limited amounts of alcohol, but I ended up just finding replacements to the sugary desserts. I would have keto desserts that were a little bit healthier, that had, different sweeteners in it, which I'm not 100% about the sweeteners either, but I had to do something. I had to have a replacement for my sugar habit. So that really helped transition that. And it's amazing how your body adapts to that and how your taste buds change over time. And I had no idea that I was so addicted to sugar, and all of these cravings weren't like a part of everybody else's life. Like, I thought people just have cravings and whatever, but now I'm like, I don't even think about it. Whereas, like, before, my body would just constantly crave this stuff. And, I did use it as a coping mechanism for stress as well. So I found out that I was training my body when it would feel stress to crave sugar, because I was training my body, like, when I'm stressed, I'm going to eat sugar. Because that's my stress response. And when I quit, I noticed that every time I felt stressed, my body wanted sugar, even though I stopped eating sugar. So it was really ingrained in me. And I noticed that as well with quitting alcohol, because when you're so used to turning to these things, your body literally is like, okay, you're stressed. That means you're going to give me alcohol. Um, so yeah, it was really hard. And then so when I quit alcohol, it was it was hard because I didn't have any other real vices to turn to, because I had already embarked on my health and wellness journey. So the only replacement I could do was non-alcoholic wine or non-alcoholic beer, which is great. Like, I like that, but it didn't give me the buzz or the relaxing feeling that I really craved when I was in those stressful situations. So I found that, just really being more intentional about who I spend my time with, learning that it's okay to be an introvert. You don't have to go to every party, you don't have to go to every networking event. And I really started to just honor the person that I actually was on my core. And I realized that it actually fixed the a lot of the need that I found previously to use alcohol. So I started really just fixing all of my emotional baggage issues, and once I started to work on those things, I slowly no longer felt like I needed alcohol. So I started dealing with the underlying root cause of why I was drinking in the first place. And then lo and behold, I realized I no longer needed alcohol at that point. So pretty amazing to
Yeah.
go through that process.
Yeah, that brings me back to another episode. We had this, guy, Johnny Lawrence, on a while ago, and I took this clip from what he had to say. Is he said once he started to work on the emotional aspect of life, alcohol gave him up because it wasn't he didn't
Yeah,
need the
that's
alcohol
great.
to solve those things. I'm thinking too back to what you mentioned there. I think that's an incredible point to make. When your body is stressed and it's craving the sugar. And I'm thinking of wine. I was never a wine drinker. Like, I don't even know, maybe a sip or two in my life. It was never my thing, but it has a lot of sugar in it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of like I'm thinking, for the alcohol and the sugar, it's right
It's a
in there
2 in
too
1.
for,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's a 2 in 1 where your body's getting both at the same time. And I mean, wine was definitely my go-to for sure.
yeah,
So yeah, double bad.
yeah. And I'm, yeah, too. Yeah. Very bad. It's interesting too. You bring up the carcinogen effects too of alcohol. Like I mean, it's probably been out there sort of low key for a while. I don't know when that first came out, but it's been out there for a while. But I feel like it's more talked about now and maybe more understood with more of the research and maybe more people looking under the hood about the effects of alcohol that maybe I mean, kind of knew, but I think it's one of those things that like you've talked about so much here, and I think it's such a important part of so many people's stories. We see it everywhere. I mean, try to drive to the grocery store and don't pass 3 billboards or don't see something where, especially here in Canada, right? It's like
Mhm.
sunny destinations. It's like, oh my gosh, beautiful people. And it's like we're sold this dream around every corner, right? Of jumping off the
Mhm.
boat or celebrities promoting it. It's like I feel like every corner, now that I'm on this side of things, I can see it, right? It's like, oh
Yeah,
my
it's more
gosh. And
obvious.
even until
Mm.
maybe a year ago, I didn't even know that there was like a restriction from them actually consuming alcohol during the commercials. I never even noticed that. Now, if you watch them, they never drink.
I did not
If they
know that,
have,
that's hilarious.
yeah. And I'm like, that is, which I never noticed it, but I'm like, yeah, I mean, it makes sense, but it's everywhere and we see it everywhere. And it's really hard to break free from, that's not like my story. My story is not the billboards. That's not how it was. I had got massive
Mhm.
anxiety the next day. I shared a post a little while ago on Instagram too that like when things went sideways in my life, I was drinking or somebody else was drinking. And if that wasn't the
Yeah.
case, things were like usually okay as far as relationships and staying out of trouble and stuff went. Moving forward here, what kind of happened to really have you walk away, for the last 3 years?
Yeah, so I when I actually made the decision to quit, it was kind of like leading up to that time, I was cutting back. I was really questioning I was at odds with myself because I was like I kind of started learning that it was bad, learning that it was a contributing factor to cancer and all of these diseases. So I was learning all this information, but did not feel like I was able to give this up for the rest of my life. I just did not think I just could not picture a life without alcohol. And so I had this in the back of my mind, and it was just all a culmination of a situation that I had. My husband and I ended up going to a conference in Florida, and there was a pre party. So, normally conferences and stuff, they'll have an ending party, but this was before the conference started, which was crazy to me. And so they had Flow Rider performing, they had a bunch of, like, tons of people there, a huge open bar, which that for me, like, open bar is like, "Okay, I'm in this crowded environment, I'm an introvert, I'm at a concert, I need to obviously have alcohol." And I remember thinking to myself, "I'm only gonna have a few glasses. I have this whole weekend ahead, I have to be at this conference, it's a long work business conference thing." And I remember specifically thinking, "I'm only gonna have a couple glasses of wine." And that did not happen. It got so out of hand. Flo Rida was pouring shots of Patron into the everybody's mouth in the front, which I was in the front there. And
Wow.
so, I have this video clip of him doing that, and it's kind of funny because this is the pivotal moment of where when I decided to quit for good. So it's kind of funny that I have that video memory of it. And so it was just and I went home that night and again, my husband doesn't drink, so he was like, not impressed that I got so drunk and intoxicated the night before, and I was up all night. I was throwing up. I was in the bathroom. I was in so much pain. My body was in so much pain. And I just remember thinking like I thought like maybe I need to go to the hospital and like get this pumped out of me. Like I had never felt that bad before, but it was just such a party environment and I had to be up early to go to this conference, and they had really pumped up this conference because we didn't know who any of the speakers were. We bought the tickets. They were like a couple $1,000s worth of tickets. So it's like I was so excited about this conference. They hyped up the keynote speaker for it. I had no idea who it was going to be. So I dragged my butt out of bed, looked like absolute crap. Like I put a hat on, I had glasses on, I could not look at bright lights. I was a mess. And so we went to this conference, but the whole situation really put things into perspective for me because I was like, something that I looked so forward to almost have been taken away and ruined from alcohol and to actually feel that much pain from it, and I felt like crap the entire weekend. I did not enjoy myself, I did not have fun, I was literally hungover for, like, 4 or 5 days. I was hungover on the flight home, and so it was just such a painful, crappy experience. I almost missed the whole weekend conference. My husband was pissed off because he had to, like, take care of me and we just didn't enjoy it as much as we would have if I didn't do that, if I didn't get that intoxicated because of it. And so that was a real pivotal moment for me and a real realization I had in the back of my mind. I knew that it was a carcinogen. I knew it was cancer causing. And I'm like, if it can make my body feel like I need to go to the hospital, then I need to stop putting this in my body. Into my health journey now. I know that it's not good for me. And if it makes my body respond in this way where I am feeling like death for days at a time, it has got to stop, and so that was the last drink that I ever had was a shot of Patron poured from Flow Rider in the front on the front of this concert, and that's my last memory of drinking, and you know what? I'm glad. Like, I went out with a bang, that's great. I will never drink ever again in my entire life, and I feel so much better because of it. So that was about 3 years ago now.
Wow, the last drink from Flow Rida. Yeah, that's wild. You know, if you think I take away a lot of stuff from there, I wrote a few things down here. You know, I talked to so many people about this journey and how it all plays out. You know, and there's kind of two ways it seems to shake out, right? People will say on January 1st, I'm quitting drinking.
Yeah.
And you know, some will, and some will slip back. And then there's the route you talked about, which I can relate to. One day I woke up and I was like, I just want to try something different. I just
Mhm.
know I kind of had this, I don't know, maybe this quick vision or these thoughts that was like, this is just you're never gonna get where you want to be. For me, this is kind of what I was telling myself. You're never gonna get where you want to be with this life. Why don't you maybe just try something else? And I see those two things, right? Some people set a quit date, and 5 years later, they share that it worked. And then I think there's other people that are overwhelmed because the quit days are never work. The quit days that they set are not sticking, and they're wondering, like, what do I do? And I think that this is always just anytime I hear this story that I can relate to is wasn't planned necessarily. I mean, but everything I think that you did prior to,
Yeah,
and I'm only guessing here, I don't know for sure, I think was setting you up in one way or another to kinda make that
absolutely.
leap. That's what it was like for my life. People are like, "Brad, what got you sober?" It's like literally like every time I went to rehab, every time I got arrested, every
Mhm.
time I told myself this is the last time, um, it finally just caught up with me where I was like, I'm just gonna try again to get put I was just gonna try to put a day together and 2 days together and started to feel better and surrounded myself with the right people. Another thing you kind of shared there stood out to me too about, you were doing the moderation thing, the cutting back thing. I think so many of us go through that because we have that instilled belief that life without alcohol is just so boring. Like, what is my life going to look like? It's just like an imaginary world. It's kind of like living on Mars. What would that
Yeah.
look like? I mean, we can't even wrap our head around something like that. And I think that's where we get stuck with alcohol. When you look back, are you able to put your finger on what was so scary, or what kind of thoughts you had of like, hey, quitting alcohol? What was going through your mind?
Yeah, like I could not fathom a world without alcohol. I loved to have experiences and a lot of the experiences that I had alcohol as a common component to it. So if you remove that, you're all of a sudden very hyper aware that it's not there. So for example, we would have girls wine and cheese nights. Okay, you can go to those for sure without drinking, but like you're very aware that you're not drinking. Like it's a very obvious thing. And then you feel deprived and you feel like, well, I'm not having as much fun as so and so who's dancing on the table having the time of her life. So you're comparing and alcohol was a part of, we would watch Bachelor on TV. There's always wine involved. So now it's like, okay, now I'm sitting down watching The Bachelor. I don't have my wine. I feel like I'm missing out. Like it's so hard. And going to wineries, like I loved doing that with my friends or my husband on the weekends, going to the wineries, doing the samples and the tastings or breweries, like all of these experiences like revolved around alcohol. So once you take alcohol away, it's like, well, now what are we going to do on the weekends? Like I'm not going to go to a brewery and just drink water. Like, you know what I mean? So it really involves redefining what fun means to you and finding other things to do or replacements for those things that you associated with your life and being fun. And I just could not fathom not doing these things. And even still, I'm like, I don't even know how I really wrapped my head around it, to be honest. I remember when I quit that day at the concert, and I was like, I told my husband, I'm like, I'm gonna quit, but don't pressure me, and if I decide that later on in a few months that I wanna have a glass of wine on a beautiful patio, I don't wanna hear anything about it, like, I still wasn't confident. Even though I wanted to, I wasn't confident in my abilities because I had never done it before, which is like, it totally makes sense to not be confident in something you've never done before, but I just didn't wanna have that high expectation of just it felt like pressure to quit drinking. It felt like if I say that I'm not gonna drink alcohol anymore, and I know deep down that I don't feel capable of that, there's a sense of pressure there that I'm not able to follow through, I'm not able to hold commitments, I'm letting other people down, like, it creates a little bit of anxiety of additional pressure to keep being sober in the beginning, not anymore for me, but in the beginning, it was a lot of
Yeah.
pressure, right? And obviously you go to these events and it's people are handing you things, and you're like, "Oh, no, I don't drink." And then you're obviously asked, "Well, why don't you drink?" And it creates this whole situation when you're in a vulnerable state being like, "Yeah, why don't I drink? Like you're drinking, everybody else is drinking." Like and it makes you hyper aware of what you can't have. So when you feel deprived with something, it's very hard as human beings to continue down the path of sobriety, especially in the beginning. So, yeah, it was a very big struggle, and it was not something that even though I said I wanted to do, that I was very confident in my ability to do.
Yeah, wow, that you just hit on a lot of stuff there. Sharing with other people, a lot of people too, and struggle in the beginning, right? Do I tell people? What if it
Yeah,
doesn't work out? What if it's just like last time to where it didn't
exactly.
work out and then I feel X, Y, and Z? I think that's what it all comes back to is like we just don't want to feel like we said we were going to do something, but we don't do it.
Exactly.
But then we look at other things in our life. It's like, I'm going to run a 5K, but if we don't do it, like, I don't know. But then you bring up the other point too. You go, to these places and it's like I'm not drinking, then you can get, an overflow of questions and, were you an alcoholic? What happened in your life? I
Yeah.
mean, people
Yeah.
can go down rabbit holes, right? And it's like
Yeah.
that's not
Yeah.
everybody's story um that quits, but I think it puts that, it kind of puts that pressure on us too. How did you switch over though? Because it sounds, correct me if I'm wrong here. At first, it's like you're being deprived of something. You can't have something, and that's what it was like for me too. I was trained in my brain that I can't have alcohol because it ruins my life. Now I come from a place of empowerment in my mind if I choose not to. I mean, I could literally,
Yeah.
close my laptop here. I could go to the store. I could go, like,
Yeah.
that's the reality. I could go and I could buy whatever I want. Nobody's gonna stop me. The world is not gonna stop, and I can do all of that stuff. In my life today, I look at it as an empowering choice that I choose not to do that, because
Yeah.
nobody would stop me. Like, my wife wouldn't stop
Yeah.
me. Like, of course, questions would be asked, but nobody's gonna hold me down. And how have things changed for you in that direction to where it's like, this is something I can't have to something I'm choosing not to have in my
Yeah,
life?
like, hugely, like, significantly, and I think that that's a really important message to just let people know that it is going to be challenging in the beginning because 'cause it's been a part of your life for however long, and you need to understand that it's going to feel like you're deprived, it's gonna feel like you can't have something, but eventually, when you get through when you just push through that and find other alternative things to help you in the meantime, um, there will be a time where you don't even think about it anymore and you don't consider it fun. You don't want anything to do with it. You don't care if other people are drinking around you. You just don't want to do it to yourself. You will get to a point, and that's the point where I'm at now. And I just thank God that I actually got to that point because when you're starting out, you don't think you're going to get to that point. I never did. I didn't think that I would ever not be able to not drink at all or not even think about it. And now, like you said, like the option is there and it just reaffirms that having the option, knowing that I could do it and I actually don't want to do it is more of an empowerment stance, like you said. And I just thank God that is a place that I'm at now. But I think it's important to acknowledge that the journey of getting there it is hard, and you have to address like, when I stopped drinking and I became sober, I was very hyper aware of all of the emotional things that I was covering up with it, and so you really have to do therapy, you have to work on yourself, do the self-development, and heal those emotional traumas and those emotional wounds so that you don't need to reach for some external vice of any kind. And for me, it wasn't just alcohol, it was shopping, it was sugar, it was those kind of things, a culmination of it, covering up your emotional issues. So now I'm like hyper aware of my issues. And the more I dealt with them, then the less I needed to turn to external things. And I think people need to realize that it is a possibility to get to a place where you don't even think about it at all. And I know that it's so hard in the beginning, and it's everybody's on their own journey. And I know a lot of people ask for advice, and you really just have to get through it. You have to care about your own health and well-being more than you care about getting drunk or the experience or associating that with fun.
So interesting though that you bring that up too about belief system change, because I was working with a group last month and that was one of our sort of modules we went through, is changing our beliefs around alcohol, right? That it's fun, that it helps us connect, that it brings value to our life. All these different beliefs we have. And I think there's like obviously the behavior change that we have to make. But then there's also those belief systems that we might have around alcohol that we have to go to work on, right? Because in my life today, I don't believe alcohol is gonna bring any value to my life, it's gonna do anything for me. It's not gonna help improve any area of my life at all. But there was time when I first started out on the journey to where, yeah, I'm wondering, right? I'm wondering, I'm slowly working through these lists. I'm going to my first Christmas and I'm having my first birthday
Yeah.
and I'm going on my first vacation, but in my mind leading up to it, sometimes I'm like, "Oh, this is just gonna be so boring."
Mm.
And, sometimes it was. Sometimes, like, I will admit, sometimes life felt that way. But what I realized looking back is I was just so used to the chaos. I wasn't used
Yeah.
to the downtime. I didn't know how to experience the peace of things. I wanted constant chaos in my life so it would distract me from actually looking in the mirror. I
Yeah.
always ask towards kind of wrapping up. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, on the belief system, but I always ask people kind of towards wrapping up. What's one thing you would share with somebody who is struggling to get or to stay sober from your own experience?
I think one of the most important things to recognize is that not everybody has your best interest in mind. So it really helps me to recognize that all of these companies that promote alcohol, all of these doctors who tell you that drinking in moderation is totally fine and healthy to do so, all of these companies that promote it and market it as a fun thing that you're going to miss out on, or your life is going to be crappier if you don't have it, recognizing what their intention is. Their intention is that they have some vested interest in the alcohol industry of some kind. And it's really important for you to think critically, to challenge those societal beliefs, and to think for yourself and to do your own research. That's really what helped me. I did my own research. I found people who were like, I found doctors who were willing to speak up and say that it does cause cancer. It is a level 1 carcinogen. Like, these are actual
Yeah.
factual things. And, marketing companies are not going to put that in their branding campaign because it makes them look bad and they're going to sell less
Yeah.
alcohol. So once you know what the motives are behind the people who endorse alcohol, and that they likely get some kind of compensation or kickback, or they get something from promoting it, or they don't care about health and well-being of yourself, right? So learning the hidden motives in our society when it comes to that, because for so long I just believed that everybody had my best interest in mind. I believed that my doctor, when he said that it was fine to have a few drinks here and there, I believed all of this stuff. And it's like, look at now, they're coming out with, there's always new studies coming out with what is the acceptable alcohol limit to drink in a safe way. And I think it went from, 2 drinks a day to like 2 drinks a week. And it's like it's slowly becoming more and more time between when is
Yeah.
how long in between you should have alcohol. And it's just becoming, I think it's going to eventually become like the cigarette industry, where it's not as prevalent, it's not as sexy, it's not as cool anymore. And I think that that's really going to happen with alcohol in the future. So I think for people listening, do your research, watch some documentaries, get educated on what it's doing to your body and to your energy and to your life force and to your spirit, and question if that's what you want to do. Don't just take our society who endorses it for profit as gospel, right? We have to question these things and decide if that's the life that you want to live for yourself. Because at the end of the day, you are the only person who has your best interest at mind. So you need to treat yourself as the number one priority and do what is in your own best interest because nobody else will care for you as much as you need to care for yourself.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that too. I think the awareness is building about the impacts, and I mean, the risk starts after the first one, for people, and it's like, yeah, when I saw those new guidelines come out, like 2 drinks a week, like, what the heck? Like,
Yeah.
what's the point? I mean,
Like,
that's
what
where,
is the point? Exactly.
things amplify, but I mean, I think that it's kinda, that they had is the punchline, "Drink responsibly." They've
Yeah,
gotten away with that for a long time, and now we're looking at Ireland, I believe, is the first one that I know of on the map, but I think it's still a couple years out, but for having labels, on the
oh,
cans,
yeah,
about the
that would be
cancer
amazing.
causing of things, and I think Health Canada, is close behind, and I'm sure others will follow suit, the same way they have done with other things, but yeah, that's the reality. I think if you talk to a lot of people, if we talk to 100 people, like, I don't know what the results would be, but if we kind of pose that question for people, I think there would still be people that had no idea sort of how impactful it is on our health. And, it's so interesting. I'm so glad that we're kind of waking up to the impacts of things and making those choices to better our life. And it affects so much. I mean, our physical health, our mental health, it affects things on so many layers of our lives. And then you hear this story all the time. I gave it up. I'm not going back and think everything in my life has improved.
Absolutely, and that's absolutely my story as well. It's like I could not feel better than I have at any other point in my life from living this healthy lifestyle, and getting rid of alcohol was a huge factor, and it was one of the most pivotal factors, sugar and alcohol for sure for me. And yeah, I feel so good that there would be no incentive now to go back to polluting my body with anything like that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story, Rebecca. I really appreciate it. And for a lot of different reasons. And one I'm thinking of off the top of my head too is there wasn't necessarily that big quote unquote rock bottom, blowing out all four tires on the highway story for you. And I really appreciate you coming forward to share that experience because I've talked with other people before that in one way or another feel kind of maybe on the outside of this whole alcohol free in sobriety journey because they don't share that story. But I think that there's obviously millions of people um, that are in this area or can really relate to your story too with how their drinking is and what it looks like for them, but also show people that there's still massive, massive benefit, life changing benefits to quitting before the wheels fall off type
Well,
thing.
yeah,
So
and
thank you
I
for
think
that.
too that yeah, you're welcome. And I think too that people in our society, they don't realize that you don't have to hit a rock bottom. You don't have to quote unquote have an addiction to it to quit, right? And I think that people think that they need to have that in order to give it up. They think that, if it's not a problem, then why consider it? And there's so many other reasons to consider it other than it becoming a problem. Because if you feel like you have to consume it at all, you're probably covering up some emotional issue, whether that's anxiety, depression, or any kind of emotional issue like that. So I think it's really important to raise awareness. And I'm so grateful that you're doing that in our community. I think it's amazing. You are so down to earth and very inspiring. And that you have a really awesome following of people who, are so inspired by what you're doing and the message that you're sharing. And I love that you have the podcast sharing individual stories because maybe my story is not relatable to somebody, but maybe it's relatable to somebody else and vice versa with all of the other stories. So the more that you're able to share that and highlight and people can find different relatability factors within other people's stories, that's really what connects us and helps us. And so I love that you're doing that. It's amazing.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. That means a lot coming from you. I'm looking in your background there too before we actually sign off here. Wake Up and Smell the Coffee. Is that what your newest book is? Is that the name of it?
Yeah, so that's my newest book. It's about waking up to our societal beliefs, questioning them, challenging them, And so I talk about a lot of things. I have a whole chapter on vices and negative coping mechanisms where I do talk about my journey of quitting alcohol, excessive shopping, and sugar. And it's just really about realigning your life to be more authentic and intentional because we're so conditioned in our society to just believe what we've always believed, believe what our parents taught us, what the teachers taught us in school. And we've never questioned things to ask ourselves if that's what we believe ourselves. So it's really about helping people wake up and smell the coffee, as the title suggests, and to learn to stop following the crowd and to start following your heart. And a lot of people will find that when they start to do that and they learn how to do that and how to live more intentionally, they will be so much happier and more fulfilled. And they will not need to turn to alcohol or sugar or all of these vices and negative coping mechanisms because you'll be happy and fulfilled.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, thank you so much. I'll drop the information too for people to check it out. And yeah, thanks for spending the last hour with us and sharing your story.
Thanks, Brad. Appreciate it.